What's going on, everybody? I'm Max Ralph.
Seth Engle.
We are back finally with a Collegian football podcast. It's been a while, school ending and everything, but we're back in full force. And what better time to do it, Seth, than big whiteout news yesterday? What was your initial reaction?
Well, I wrote a column a couple weeks ago, kind of, saying that Ohio State should be the whiteout regardless. So it's not like I was surprised that they announced it as Minnesota, but I have my reasons for why I believed it should have been Ohio State, regardless of if the game was at noon or not. And I know that not everyone agrees with me there because they say, "Oh, whiteout has to be at night or it's
It
not
has
the
to be
real
at night.
thing." I
Yeah,
get that. I get that.
it's happened like 5 times where it's not at night, but it looks better. Like
Yeah,
undoubtedly,
that's
it
the
looks
other thing
better.
too. Yeah, that's the other thing. Like it's happened. Like there have been day whiteouts.
Yeah,
But I guess it's picked up in recent years to the point where it's just like this whole TV thing and this
Mhm.
whole event where game day has to be there. So like it kind of has to be at night. So I get that.
Yeah,
What are your thoughts there? I know you had, you were thinking more of a revenue standpoint,
yeah.
a media revenue standpoint. If you want to explain that.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. Like, I think the whole point behind a whiteout in its essence was to give like a home field advantage to the max for Penn State. And why would you waste that on Minnesota versus Ohio State? That part, like, I'm for Ohio State there, but sports these days, it's all about money. Like you can't get away from it. It's money, money, money. And we know for a fact that Fox has the broadcasting rights to Penn State, Ohio State that day. And so my guess is it's probably going to be their big noon kickoff game, and the set will be in University Park, and they'll have that noon kickoff game. So you have that flagship show from Fox there that week, and then the very next week you've got a 7:30 kick with Minnesota, the whiteout, and 7:30 usually on ESPN, ABC, and each of the past 5 years, College Game Day has been at Penn State whiteout. So it just makes sense, like for Penn State from a money perspective, because you're going to sell more tickets, you're going to get more revenue, just like in-state college as a whole. More people will be there if you get game day. And like, why would you make the whiteout the same day that you're going to get Fox's big noon show? Because that way you can't have both big noon and game day. So it just makes sense. Like if you're following the money, Minnesota was really the only choice to be the whiteout, as much as from what the whiteout should be doesn't necessarily make sense, because Minnesota, while they might be ranked when they come into that game, it's all about the money, in my opinion. Like that's why this happened.
And I mean, people are still going to go. I think just one thing that people aren't really getting is the fact that you can't have Ohio State and you can't have Ohio State whiteout and that also be a night game, which is what a lot of people are calling for. They're not like reading into the fact that like, okay, the World Series is also going on at the same time on Fox. So that's just not going to work out. So there are a lot of things that went into it. Minnesota's going to be a cool whiteout regardless. I mean, there's history between the two teams.
There is. I mean, shoot, the 2019 matchup, Minnesota kind of derailed a really good season for Penn State. So it'll be great. And
something else I think was cool, like from that game. I mean, that was at Minnesota, and they brought, the house. Like, it was packed. And I think that, there's something about that, even when you're watching it on TV, it almost felt like you were in Minnesota a little bit. You could kind of feel that cold. I guess I was in Chicago, so maybe I really was feeling that weather.
You probably were.
But I definitely think that, having Minnesota come back for that rematch and being in the atmosphere, in a whiteout in Beaver Stadium, it should be a good time. Especially
I think
Morgan and Sean Clifford, both 6 years.
It's wild. I mean, that's the second time it's going to happen this season with Aiden O'Connell in the season opener in Purdue as well. That's like crazy. That's a crazy storyline. But I agree. It'll be a good matchup. Both teams should be ranked considering it's early enough in the season. But it's just like it's about the money, but don't get too discouraged, because I think the whiteout will still be good. And I'm a fan of how the stripe out looks. Like, and you get a student section whiteout anyway for Ohio State, so I don't think it's the end of the world. But that's our two.
I have one worry. I love the stripe out, and the stripe out that was at night. The one against Indiana, I thought that looked beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
They did the helmet stripe, which was a day game against Michigan.
Yeah.
I'm worried that since Ohio State is during the day, that it's going to look similar to that helmet stripe in
The
the
helmet stripe was bad.
game. It looked gross. It honestly
It
looked
was
gross.
not good. It was not good.
Um, that's my one worry with this. It's
Yeah.
either way, we're talking about game themes, so it's not the end of the world.
Right.
But it should work out. It should work out.
Yeah. Well, that's our 2 cents on the whiteout. But final word: follow the money always. But anyway, just to move on a little bit, we are now officially in June. It's June 2nd or 3rd. I don't even know. But it's the 2nd officially. My phone was charging, so I didn't see it. But it's June 2nd. June, July, big recruiting months for everybody, but especially Penn State. You mentioned, Seth, that Penn State picked up 12 commitments last year across the month of June and July, which is, they went on an absurd hot streak. We talked about it. I remember it was like every other day they had a commitment coming in. Maybe not quite to that level this year, but it's still a big month if you want to kind of go through and look at just how big this month is going to be.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think Penn State's recruiting class last year was even close to as complete that it is right now. I mean, Penn State already has 12 commits right now, as we enter June. But there are some big names that are coming, and it really starts on Friday with Jason Moore, who's someone that's been on their timeline for a while. Really early on, like into his football career, because this is a guy that, he's a straight up athlete. He's really a basketball player at heart. Made that transition to football a few years ago. And then it just became his number one sport. And now, he's rising up boards.
Oh, he's
that's a guy that's been heavily linked to Notre Dame, but he could come in on this official visit he's taking on Friday. And Penn State could potentially separate themselves, similar to like what they did with Nick Singleton when he was deciding between Notre Dame and Penn State. And then also a little bit of deny Dennis Sutton when it was between Georgia and Penn State last summer. And he's just a really athletic guy from DeMatha Catholic in Maryland. I think they would love to grab. That's just a solo visit. Over the next couple weeks, we're going to start to see these, parties in Happy Valley.
We saw a lot of those last year too.
Right. And those are the really important ones because you're going to have a good mix of big name targets, but you're also going to have a mix of guys who are already committed. And that always helps. We're going to see a little bit of that on June 10th. Treon Webb is coming. He used to be committed to Oklahoma. He's a running back. He'll be there. Neo Avery is going to be there, who was once committed to Penn State, ended up decommitting. A few other guys in the mix there. A couple other commits, such as a Johnny Shakur. Marcus Stokes, the QB, is going to be there. The next week's going to be the biggest one because next week there are some can't miss guys. Tamir Robinson, Tony Rojas, 2 linebackers from the East Coast. Tamir Robinson, obviously one of the best players in the state. Those are guys they have to lock up. And I think it's good that they're coming the week that there's going to be 9 already committed guys on that visit. So that's going to be the big week is June 17th. Caden Proctor, the number one offensive tackle in the country, is going to be there too. And he'll be there with Alex Birchmeyer and Javen Williams.
That's exactly what I was going to say. That day is so huge because I was thinking about Proctor the whole time, and it's just so interesting to me. We talked about those parties. They did them last year. Like there were guys like Caden Saunders and Ken Talley, like going all over social media, and they were on these recruiting visits and just recruiting other recruits. And so you bring in Caden Proctor on the same weekend as Alex Birchmeyer and Javen Williams. Like this is the time for Penn State to separate themselves, like you said. There's just so much going on, and that weekend is just gonna be huge. Tamir Robinson and Tony Rojas are 2 interesting ones because the linebacker spot is something the 2 of us have talked about before, where that kind of feels like the only place where Penn State's lacked a little bit the past 2 years. Abdul Carter was a great pickup, and like the staff is super excited about him. We already know before he's even on campus, but that's the biggest name. I mean, Talley's a linebacker, but got some rushing in him too. Keon Wiley the same way. So Rojas and Robinson are 2 big names, and then you bring in Proctor, Rojas, Robinson all in the same weekend. that weekend is just massive, and I really don't think it can be understated.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll just lay it out a little bit what we're going to start to see here for the summer. June, that's just official visits. Maybe you'll get a couple committed guys in there, maybe near the end of the month.
Yeah.
After they take their official, they might like announce like, okay, I'm going to announce like next week or something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
July is going to be the biggest month in terms of commitments. And that's just how it is. Last year, it was just such a big July for us. You know, it's like almost every day.
Oh yeah, the 4th of July, there were 4 commitments.
Oh yeah, and then it's going to be nuts in July. It shouldn't really be any different than it was last year. You know, what I'm expecting here is that Penn State is going to have just as good as a recruiting class, if not better than it was last year. They're already shaping up to do that. Their first commitment in the class was a 5-star O lineman.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Can't really complain about that. It should be a good class, and I think they're committing guys into areas that they need. You know what I mean? They're building that O line, and you know, I always say a championship team is built on the interior. So
on the trenches, No, and you already mentioned it. How this class is maybe a little bit ahead of where last year's was going into the summer, and those offensive linemen are exactly where you start. Birchmeyer, Williams, Anthony Donko. It's a really strong class on the offensive line, and you don't have to have the 5-star skill players like you had last year and Drew Aller and Nick Singleton, because you had them last year and they'll be here. Kind of have that opportunity to almost skip a year. And so, this class is really well put together, but that kind of brings us to our last point of the day. Current competitions going on as we head into summer workouts and then fall camp. This roster right now is pretty much set. I mean, there's not a lot of discrepancy, but there's a couple of spots that I think the two of us are looking at pretty closely. Middle linebacker, which has been talked about since before spring started. The guard spots, for me, both sides on offense, offensive line, and kicker and punter. I mean, you lose Jordan Stout. That's kind of a big loss. But Seth, break these down just a little bit real quickly.
So, you know, starting with the guard spots, I think this is something that's been really interesting. Because in the spring, if you remember, the offensive line was just so short. So much so that they had to completely change the spring game format because they didn't have enough offensive linemen. Now they have a good number of, you know, capable offensive linemen who could potentially start. Just a matter of where you're going to put them. So what do you think right now? Who's your base starting line right now?
Well, I think Olu Fashanu is locked in at left tackle.
Right.
We saw Landon Tengwall at left guard during the spring, but that's kind of where that gets messy for me. I'll get back to that. Juice Scruggs is a lock at center. Sal Wormley was at right guard, and right tackle was Caden Wallace. So, but to me, it's those guard spots. I think Fashanu's gotten high praise from coaches. Scruggs has gotten high praise from coaches. And even though he struggled last year, Caden Wallace has gotten a lot of praise from coaches and throughout the spring and the offseason so far. So that's when you get to the guard spots. Tangwall, obviously super highly recruited out of high school, big prospect, played pretty well in the Rutgers game and the Outback Bowl. Kind of showed what the coaches needed to see from him. But then he's a guy who can swing between tackle and guard. Wormley, on the other hand, was a guy who was hurt all of last season, but was slated to be a starter, according to James Franklin. So it's kind of interesting. Wormley's got more experience than Tangwall. I feel like in my gut, he's probably pretty locked in on that right side, at least for now. Wormley. And then the left side is the interesting one because Penn State just brought in one of the top offensive line transfers in the nation in Hunter Norzad from Cornell. So I think that left guard spot is where you might see changes heading into fall camp, in where Norzad could take over from Tangwall, even if it's just at the beginning of the season because he's more experienced. But my gut's telling me that Norzad wins that competition. But I think that's one of the biggest competitions right now.
Yeah, so when it comes to Norzad, I have to think about, when he originally sat down with the coaching staff, what was being said, because he had other offers from, Big Ten schools.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to guess they probably didn't guarantee him a starting spot, but like
Right.
it's kind of like given, like, all right, you already were like an All-American at Cornell.
Yeah.
You're a graduate senior.
You're coming in with 1 year of eligibility.
Yeah, he's not coming to sit on the bench. So it's
Right.
kind of like leads me to believe he's probably going to start. It's just a
Mhm.
matter of where. He said Sal Wormley is more experienced than Lana Tangwell, but does he have more game experience?
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Also, you also have to think about reps, which James Franklin talks about all the time.
Yeah.
Tangwell might be younger and
He
have
might
less
be. Yeah.
experience on the roster,
Hmm.
but he played a good portion of last year while Wormley was injured.
Yeah.
So we'll have to see what happens there. There is a lot of capability there. You also have to think about JB Nelson potentially play a big role as the season goes along.
Yeah.
You know, they haven't shied away from giving those Lackawanna guys big game experience their first year on campus.
Sure.
We haven't heard too much about him yet, but you know, he was one of the top JUCO transfers.
Yeah. He was a
coming
big
in
get.
this year. So
He was a big
yeah,
get.
we'll have to see about that.
Yeah.
Moving on, middle linebacker. This might be, you know, the biggest hole, and it's different than a competition on the O line because it's like, okay, the O line is capable. It's just a matter of like where you're going to put these guys.
Yeah.
Middle linebacker is a little iffy right now, and it probably is their wouldn't say their worst, but you know, it could be one of their slowest position groups to start the year.
Yeah.
So it's really a matter of whether you're going to start Tyler Elsdon or Kobe King.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
It's hard to say because I think this is probably the third time we've talked about this on the podcast already. It's like June. Excuse me. But I think this is going to end up being a situation where you see both of them in heavy doses. I don't like you might, one of their names is going to flash across the screen on Saturdays in Beaver Stadium as the starter, but you're going to see both of them constantly. And that's one thing that is different between offensive line and defense. Like you're rotating guys in on defense so much more than you will on offensive line. Okay. I think what we saw in the blue white game, the spring practice, I don't even know if you can call it a game, but I think what we saw there, like they both looked solid. I think Kobe King might have the edge from an athletic standpoint. But Tyler Elsdon's been around an extra year, and really the staff has said a lot of good things about him. I remember last year, Brent Pry, while he was still around, was saying a lot of really good things about Tyler Elsdon. So, I think it's, like you said, one of the weaker position groups on the roster in my mind right now, but partially that's just because we haven't seen these guys. So it's going to come down to, week one. We'll find out week one. But I do really think that it's going to be a situation where you see both of those guys a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I agree for sure. Moving on, this is interesting because you got special teams competitions.
Yeah.
Which we haven't seen, at least in a couple of years, with Stout pretty much holding it down at both kicker and punter. Let's start with kicker because I feel like this is a little more solidified. Potentially could see some competition there. It's likely going to be Jake Pinniger. To no one's surprise. I think Sanders Sahaydak could potentially give him, a run for his money. We'll see how that goes. But I mean, people were calling for Jake Pinniger to be their field goal guy, or at least their extra point guy and short field goal guy last year when Stout was struggling in that regard.
What was it? That was just week one against Wisconsin last year when Jordan Stout missed a field goal and somebody asked where was Jake Pinniger. James Franklin said he was available. But no, I agree with you. I mean, Pinniger's done the job before. I mean, before Stout took that role over. 2 years later, I think he'll probably have a handle, at the very least, back on that short kicking role like he did before. So Haydick has the scouting report has him with a little bit of a stronger leg. Even from high school, he was kicking well into 50 yards, and that's not Pinniger's strong suit, or at least hasn't been. But I do think that, again, just being that veteran, at least at the beginning of the season, is probably going to give Pinniger the edge. As much as that's a hole to fill from Stout leaving, it's not quite the hole that's left at punter because, I mean, you just had a guy get drafted as the number one punter in the draft a couple of weeks ago. So that's a big hole. And really, there's 3 names that could go there. Throughout the spring, there were 2, but now there's another one. Barney Amor and Gabriel Nwosu were the big names in the spring. They both looked really solid in the blue-white game. Nwosu, according to James Franklin, kind of outperformed where he had been all spring. If you would have asked me right after the blue-white game, I think Barney Amor was the starting punter. But, there's still a lot of time to go before week 1. And now, like I said, there's another wrinkle into the fold with Alex Bacchetta, the top-ranked punter in the nation, coming in as the recruiting class. My gut still tells me that Amor is probably going to win this one out, but there's been a lot of good things said about Bacchetta even Amor himself talked to him after the blue-white game and asked him what he knows about Bacchetta. And it's kind of hard to deny the fact that you've got the number 1 punting recruit in the nation coming in. But yeah, that's kind of where I see that right now.
Yeah, something so fun about having like a punter competition. I don't know why. And the fact that one of the punters in the competition is just 6'6", 278, just makes this super interesting. Like, they're just characters here. There's a guy whose name is Barney Amor. There's a guy who's 6'6", 278, and then there's the number 1 punter in the country who's a freshman.
Yeah.
So it's like there are a lot of like different characters here, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
We'll kind of see how that plays out as the fall nears. But those are pretty much our, position competitions for right now. Obviously, a bunch of still guys still coming to campus, and they'll enter as we move along in June and July, and they'll just be up before they start camp. So still got a number of guys left to come, but yeah.
Yep. That's where we see it shaking down. Whiteout, follow the money, some big recruiting coming in June, and a couple of position battles that we are obviously the final say on. So thanks for watching today. We're hoping to do this a little more often now, getting a rhythm in the summer. Keep tracking along with us on collegian.psu.edu and on Twitter at PSU Footblog. Peace.